So what's been happening over there?
Just, I've been doing a lot of interviews for this book I've been working on. It's a project I started back in 2008, and I made significant progress with it. I've interviewed about 160 people so far.
Okay. Wow.
And I probably have about another 100 to go. So.
Oh shit! It's going to be a big book.
Well, it's actually 3 books, and depending on what year you started is when what book you'll appear in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Wow. Jeez. Yeah. So are you doing like East Coast, West Coast, or anything like that, or
all of Canada? And then there's going to be a few people like yourself who have spent a bit of time in Canada and are worth noting. It's like I documented Leo Zuleta. You know, he tattooed at Jefferies' shop as well, and that's where you tattooed, right, for the 6 months?
No, it was longer than 6 months. We were there for nearly 2 years.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we were there from. I did 2 summers there, and we sort of got there early 89, and we left at the end of 90.
Okay, so I thought you were only at Paul's shop for 6 months, but it was a couple of years.
So yeah, Canada was a big part of it for my wife and I. We loved it. We loved our time there. My wife actually worked at Moxie's down on 7th, I think it was 17th or 11th, and then she ran a bar out on Chinook. She ran a bar out there for a year. So you know we were well entrenched there.
Yeah, that sounds that way. We'll go back to the start of your career and just sort of work our way forward. What was your earliest memories of tattoos?
Oh, when I was a kid, I was just fascinated with it. You didn't see a lot of them, and it was usually the rougher guys that had the tattoos, you know, the sailors and that. But I come from a country town where, you know, you didn't see a lot of them, but when you saw them, I got excited about them. I was like, they fascinated me.
Yeah.
So I can't explain why or anything like that. It was just something I just gravitated to from a young age. And then I was lucky up, you know, to one of my brothers got tattooed. That really sort of got things going.
Yeah.
You know, and I actually started an apprenticeship, or I did an apprenticeship as an electrician. And it was about my 3rd pay packet. I went down and finally got tattooed.
Okay.
And I was about 16 and a half, you know, but yeah, that was back in the day. It was just a fascination of tattoos back then that started it all. And we had a guy in our town that was covered in tattoos, and I used to spend a lot of time talking to him. But of course, the information back then was non-existent. You know, to look at the tattoo, where to get equipment, or how to do anything. And tattooists weren't going to tell you a thing. You know? No. They weren't going to do nothing, right?
Yeah.
I remember one shop that he was probably one of the best tattooers in Australia, and I was going there and getting tattooed, and he had a big sign painted on his wall saying, "Don't ask any fucking questions."
Classic old school shop, right?
Yeah, right. So that was you know the start of the fascination of it, and getting tattooed. And I started getting tattooed during my apprenticeship as an electrician, and trying to watch what they were doing, how they were doing it. But it was hard work, you know. And the only magazine that had any sort of tattoo reference in it was Easy Rider magazine.
That's great.
So I think I was looking through one of those one day in a newsagent, and I spotted a tattoo supply, which was the old Spalding and Rogers ad in there, right? I think there was 2 ads. There was Spalding and Rogers and S&W.
Okay, yeah.
Tattoo supplies. And so as soon I'd finished my apprenticeship, and I had enough money. I actually sent off to Spalding and Rogers to try and get a catalogue, and not, like that was an ordeal in itself back then.
Yeah.
Trying to get like from a country town, trying to get something sent from America, so it was like you had to send a letter over, then they'd send you like a pro forma invoice back. Yeah. Then you had to pay for the catalog or the shipping, and so it took a good couple of months to get the catalog.
Sure, yeah. So, now, how old would you have been when you ordered that catalog?
Oh, probably around 20.
20.
Yeah, 19, 20. Yeah, I think I had the catalog for a while before I started having the guts to go, oh, I'm going to buy this, So yeah. I had no idea what I was buying, like in the catalog it all looked, the starter kit, 2 machines. I think it was a 4 or 5 tight liner and a 14 round shader.
Okay.
A couple of colors. I ordered that, but being the naive idiot that I was back then, I forgot to order a power supply.
Okay, yeah.
So all this equipment turned up, right? But I had a supply, and I was like, oh, what the hell? So being an electrician, I kind of figured out that, okay, I could use I used a train set controller.
Yeah.
Which my sister's boyfriend, he had one, and I hooked it all up, and it actually worked. And then I realized I could go down to the local electronics store and buy a proper power supply. I didn't have to get one from America. I think the other thing that threw me was you guys are on 110 and we were on 240 volts, right? And I was thinking, well, I can't buy that because it's only 110.
That's right.
It's not going to work here in Australia. So
yeah.
But anyway, I figured it out. I got through it, and I was very determined to be a tattooer, and did my very first tattoo on a girlfriend's friend, and it didn't go too well.
No. Kind of like all of us at the start, right?
Oh God, yeah. I remember I drove down, because it was like I lived like 100 miles, like from 160 kilometers from the city. So I remember driving down to get a tattoo. I went into a tattoo studio and I said, can I ask you some questions? And he just looked at me and he went, if you want any questions answered, you have to get tattooed.
Okay.
So I got a little tiny bird. It was $15.
Yeah.
And I think he just showed me how to use the foot switch and clip cord. And
that was your $15 worth, right?
That was my thing, a little bird riding.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah. So that was my introduction to it all.
So when you had your machine in your hand for the first time and you're about to touch down on the skin, like what was going through your head? Like, holy shit.
I was like, fuck, like, how am I going to do this? I had no idea, like, I had no idea of depth. And, the colors that they sent, right, were, they were, back then, there was a little pre-mixed bottles of Spalding, and they just, I couldn't get in the skin. The colors wouldn't go in, and I just tore up the skin. And I think there was Vaseline on the ends of the needles, and I even forgot to wash the Vaseline off the ends of the needles, to stop them from going rusty. It was a nightmare.
Sure, yeah. Now, you would have been around 20, 21 when you did your first tattoo?
Yeah, about 20.
So then, you do your first tattoo. How did you start transitioning from there? Like, did you get some more help, or you just kept at it?
I just kept at it. I was getting more and more tattoos, and I ended up buying some more needles, and the usual. We weren't wearing gloves or sterilizing back then. It was none of that. It was, I just kept persisting at it. Kept fucking people's arms up and legs. And it's, nothing much has really changed when you think about it. Like back then, I had people that wanted to get big work, big designs, not sleeves or anything like that, not back then, but just big pieces. And I couldn't tattoo for shit, but they still wanted to go ahead with it. And I'm like, no, so I just tried to keep smaller things until I sort of got a little bit of a handle on it. And asking questions, sort of working my, getting friendly with a couple of tattooers. And then I'd done a tattoo on a friend of mine that had also, it's a bit of a complicated story, but he'd got tattooed off a really good young tattooer in Melbourne. And he went to a shop, and there was this woman there, Patsy, and she saw his tattoo. And she said, "Who did that?" And he thought she was pointing to my tattoo.
Okay.
And he gave her my name and that. And she said, "Tell him to come down." So I went down to the shop and drove all the way down, showed her my drawings and that. And she just looked at me and she goes, "That's not the tattoo that I saw."
Yeah.
And I was, no, well, I don't know. Anyway, she was kind enough. She was good. She sort of sat me down and showed me a few things and let me hang around the studio. And I was washing the floors, cleaning up. And she had a guy, Neil Davies, working for her. And they were both really good. They were, very helpful. And I was in the shop one weekend. I used to drive down on the weekends and just sit in the shop and watch. These were the sacrifices you had to make, finish work on a Friday, drive all the way down to Melbourne, go to her shop sometimes on the Friday night because they were always busy back then, and definitely on the Saturday and just hang out. And one Saturday, Neil rang and he'd been on a bender and he couldn't turn up. So Patsy just looked at me and she said, "Well, I guess you're up."
Okay. Yeah.
Busy Saturday afternoon, busy Saturday in the shop, and I had no idea. I had a little bit of an idea what I was doing, but she was great. She helped me through it. So that was the start, sort of getting professional at it.
Okay, so another holy shit moment in your career.
Oh yeah, it was terrifying. It was, the machines you had it. It wasn't like today where everything's done for you. It was like you had to do everything yourself. It was hard work, and then on top of that, the traveling and and it was through her that I met a famous woman from Australia, Bev Robinson, Cindy Ray.
Yeah, I know who that is.
And she was tattooing at the time, and she was probably the most lovely woman you would ever meet in tattooing. She was amazing, right? Wasn't the greatest tattooer. She knew that, but because she was so heavily tattooed and that people were fascinated by her, they would go there. And she was working in a shop in the city. So I used to go in and see her, and she'd let me work in, it was a very busy shop, and she'd let me do some work in there.
Okay.
And so I was sort of bouncing between those two shops for a little while. And then I ended up opening a small studio in my hometown while working as an electrician during the day and then tattooing at night.
Okay, yeah.
And through Bev, she introduced me to the National Tattoo Association and the magazine and that's where I started seeing all these international, like Ed Hardy, Bob Roberts, and some guy from Canada called Paul Jefferies, right? And I was like, this stuff looks great. And so I made a decision I wanted to go to San Francisco and get tattooed off Ed Hardy, and to New York to get tattooed off Bob Roberts.
Yeah.
And that was in 1982.
Okay.
So a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, we bought a ticket, had no idea what we were doing, where we were going, like finally I ended up getting through to Ed Hardy's studio, made an appointment, and then I booked a ticket to go. And I was still working as an electrician, so I took some time off from annual leave and went over there. And I ended up on that trip, went to and got tattooed off Ed Hardy, Bob Roberts, and I went to the National Tattoo Convention that was in Arlington in Virginia.
Okay.
I think. Yeah. So, and got to meet on that trip. So I met Bob Roberts, Ed Hardy, Shotzi Gorman, Carrie Barber.
Yeah.
She was just sort of starting out around that time. Greg Irons. So I met all these people, and they were absolutely fantastic,
That's right. Those are some heavy hitters there.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you're just in awe, and I had the camera and I was just taking photos and asking a lot of questions. Bob Roberts actually introduced me to, I can't remember if it was a 9 or an 11 needle mag. He said, "This is what you got to be using." And he actually gave me one.
Okay.
And I bought it all the way, but I didn't have a tube to put it in.
Okay. Yeah.
Forgot to get the tube as well. So, but yeah, that was the start of it all,
So when you came home from that trip, your head must have been so full, and just a whole new world must have opened up in your eyes, seeing all that.
Yeah. Well, then, like mixing color and making needles. I mean, Ed Hardy was actually very good. He told me how he mixed his color. Like, he must have just thought, this kid's just, he's not going to be any threat or anything like that. And what the hell? So he showed, he actually grabbed a big a glass container out to fill up his blue or his green or whatever it was. And I said, and I asked him a few questions, and he told me at that time he was, I think he was using a blender to blend his pigment. And then of course Bob Roberts, he was really good. He actually showed me, like how to angle the mag and things like that. And we talked a little bit about colors, but it was, like you said, it was a lot. It was a lot to process,
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first of many, many, many trips to America. That was the first one. So.
Okay. That sounds like it would have been such a legendary trip to see all that in one vacation. Like
Chuck Eldridge, he was another one that we met.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. And it wasn't until probably a couple of years later that I realized how lucky I was, but the crazy thing is I got back to Australia and, I'd got a dragon off Hardy and I got a tiger off Bob Roberts. And, it was like the Australian tattooers were like, why do you need to go to America? You get that done here, and I was like, well, no, you can't. But I was a bit of an outsider back then, because I wanted to travel. I wanted to learn. I was, so, yeah.
And that's very early in your career to be jet setting halfway across the world to pursue your career. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how else was I going to learn? Nobody here was really it was a very closed-minded. And if you were a little bit different, as in you really wanted to learn and not just sit around and smoke dope or snort speed or drink,
Yeah.
You were considered like an outsider, like that was very much the scene back then.
Yeah.
But I was very passionate and just very determined to make. So the next trip I went via Hawaii, and I went to Mike Malone's China Sea Tattoo.
Okay.
this was probably the game changer. I remember walking into China Sea, and it was Mike Malone and Candy Everett. And I can't remember if Lance McLean was there at the time or not, but he definitely wasn't in the shop that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I introduced myself, and I said, I'm just learning to be a tattooer. I want to be a tattooer, and blah blah. And Mike looked at me and he said, "You want to be a tattooer? You want to learn? You go sit in that chair there." And I sat in this chair, and then he brought out these photo albums, and he said, "This is tattooing," and he just put them on my lap, and it was all Sailor Jerry stuff, right?
Okay.
I'm looking through the book trying to be interested, but I'm also, like, no disrespect, but I was more interested in watching them tattoo, or
sure,
I want to get tattooed so that I could watch, not look at the pictures. But yeah, it was an interesting introduction to those guys. And then I ended up getting tattooed off Candy Everett, and she was lovely. And we were talking about the Hardy tattoo that I got in the Bob Roberts, and then she was showing me some photos, and she actually showed me this picture of some work from Paul Jefferies, and I was like, I was like, oh my God, where is this? And I got at that time he was selling his first sets of flash, and she had a flyer, and she gave it to me. And I went, when I finally got back to Australia after that trip, I went and got tattooed off Peter Poulis. Who else did I get tattooed off? Jack Rudy.
Okay.
They see me in peace, young Jack, and I got tattooed off all those guys. And then when I got back to Australia, I couldn't get this Paul Jefferies out of my head. His work just resonated with me. It was like it was a light bulb went off, right?
Sure, yeah.
Oh my God. He also showed me some photos of John's work, the Dutchman's, but Paul's really stuck in my mind for some reason. I just felt a connection with it. And I wrote to Paul, ordered his flash, and wrote him a letter. And as Paul does, he always likes to send photos out of his work. So I got these photos of his work and a nice letter from Paul. So we started writing a little bit backwards and forwards. And I went to America a couple of times again in between. And then in 1989, I went to, so I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit here, but just to get to where I met Paul, we were at a tattoo convention in Texas, a national tattoo convention. And at that time, I was with my wife now, who was my girlfriend at the time, and we'd taken, I decided I didn't want to work as an electrician anymore. I wanted to work as a tattooer, and I wanted to go to America and then up to Canada, and I wanted Paul to do my back. And so we packed everything up, and we were going to go overseas for 12 months and just travel, and I was going to try and work. I had an aunt that lived in Wisconsin, did some work up there, and then we went to the convention, and I ran into Paul Jefferies and his wife Wink, and I was talking to them at the convention, and I said to Paul, I really want to come up and get my back done. That's what the main part of this trip is for. And he said, "Oh, yeah, no worries, blah blah." And he said, "Oh, we'll see what we can do." And we were talking with Wink, and then she said to my girlfriend, she said, "Well, maybe we could get you guys to come up and work." And I just sort of, was like, and we continued. We continued that weekend, drinking with them and having a good time. And we left the convention and we continued on our trip. We had a car and we drove around through America, and we went up into Niagara Falls, up into Ontario, and up through Sault Ste. Marie. And we met some guys in Hawaii that lived in Winnipeg, and they wanted us to come and see them. So we called in there and we saw them. And when I was in Winnipeg, I called Paul's studio to make an appointment to get my back done. And Wink said to me, she goes, "Is there any chance you can come over straight away?" And I was like, yeah, probably. Why? Is it, is there an opening to get tattooed? And she goes, "No, we need somebody to work.
Okay.
It's busy." And I just shit my pants. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Another holy shit moment.
So, and in that time, before all of that, leading up to that, I closed the little shop that I had, quit my job. And, we'd made that decision to travel. So we didn't really have any ties to anything, So from Winnipeg, we drove straight to Paul's shop in Calgary. Well, Wink had given me the address. I went straight to the house. She met us at her house and was kind enough. They said, "Well, you can stay here for a few days or a little bit until we can get you sorted." So she said, "You're going to start work tomorrow. Are you okay with that?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck, yeah, I guess." I hadn't even seen the shop.
Yeah.
I hadn't even seen Paul,
Yeah.
And then he come home from work. And of course, as Paul does, he, straight downstairs to the pool room and, cracked the beers and we started drinking and talking. Yeah. And that was the first step into Smile and Buddha.
Yeah. That's so, I got tingles all over me just hearing about your journey and the transition that you went through.
It was definitely interesting, and it happened fairly quick, all of that, I went up there just to get a back job, and next thing, he's asking me to work there, and as excited as you are, he's a world famous tattooer. The work's incredible, and that your work isn't up to scratch.
That's right.
And you've got to be honest with yourself and go, But he said straight up, he said, "All you're going to do is roses and maple leaves."
Okay.
Little roses, leaves. That was it. That was all I was allowed to do. And butterflies, So it was like a gradual, you worked your way up to things in his studio, You did all that, and then you could do an eagle. And I think that when he actually comes to you and he says, "Well, I think you're ready to do," if somebody comes in and wants a tiger. Okay, right. You know you've made it,
Yeah. That's a big day, right?
But yeah, that was all stuff that I learned along the way. But yeah, that first day in his studio was, I remember that Kenny Cameron was working there at the time as well. So, he's an interesting character, Paul, because he's a good drinker. He's a great pool player. And he tests you out.
Okay.
It's all he wants to see, whether how far you'll go with the drinking, whether you'll just get yourself shit faced and to try and impress him, or and I was very restricted. I was pulled back a bit, and it's no, I've got to work tomorrow. So, and then I wasn't a bad pool player, so I sort of ticked a couple of boxes.
Okay. Yeah.
So the next day, the first day at the studio, I walked in and I think the first thing that shocked me was how small it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was a tiny studio. And I don't know if you know or you've seen much of the early days of Smile and Buddha, but it was a tiny little studio. And there was two stations where Kenny and then, I was there. And then there was a wall with a hole cut in it, like a window, and Paul was on the other side of the wall. And I happened to be sitting right next to that wall. And then there was a little reception desk and, a waiting room that you could probably get 3 or 4 people in at the most.
Yeah.
And I remember that I got my first tattoo and Wink set the stencil up. She did everything. And I put the stencil on. It was a terrible moment, here I am. I really had it was like going back to kindergarten,
Sure, yeah.
And I fired up the machine, and of course, Paul, he's like, "Oh, what the fuck's that?" put a muffler on that.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, he looked at my machines and he said, we got to get rid of these. So we jumped on he rang Colonel Todd.
Okay.
And ordered a machines for me from Colonel Todd.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is that during that time, that first couple of months, was the people that would come through the studio and how heavily tattooed they were, and where they got tattoos from. But the one that stuck out was, the Dutchman stuff. I got to see if people would always call in if they were even just passing through. They'd say, "Oh, John told me to call in and show you this." So Paul would always be like, "Hey, Trevor, come here and have a look at this."
Okay, yeah.
And got to see, John's work firsthand. Like, it was incredible, so, and it was always interesting, like talking to John's customers and just the way his approach to tattooing. And I couldn't get over the fact that he was drawing a lot of the stuff on just with a paintbrush, just painting it on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I remember watching him paint on a tattoo when I was there interviewing him. He did a tattoo after and watched him paint it on with a brush, and it just blew my mind. Did you end up meeting the Dutchman in that 2 years' time?
Yeah. So there was a time where Paul and I flew out to Vancouver, and Paul got in touch with John, and John said, "Just come and stay at the house." John was actually tattooing out of his house at that time.
Okay.
We went to the house. I met John, and we were staying there. But Paul took off and went and drank with his buddies from East Van, and I was left with John. And so John gave me some drawing lessons, some life lessons, business lessons, John. And it was incredible. I still got all the notes that he wrote on a bit of paper, about composition, and he spent a lot of time with. Incredibly grateful for just that short amount of time at that particular, the 2 days that I was there, what he taught me, and the time. So yes, and then we sort of become friends after that. I'd write to him, and we'd run into each other occasionally, and I know. A few years later, I ended up going back there and doing a guest spot, which was kind of nice.
Yeah.
So.
And you probably got quite a few more drawing lessons during that guest spot.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he was. He'd pull out drawings and show me, and a lot. Just incredible what he was doing. He was the next level. It was like Paul's tattooing was technically better, but John's artwork was above Paul's. Yeah. So they. In the early days, I think they spent a little bit of time tattooing together where they, John would, help Paul with drawing and composition, and then Paul would help John with tattooing, like the actual machine skills and things like that. So
that's right.
Yeah.
I know when I did a guest spot at the Dutchman's, every day I'd show him my drawing, and he'd always say, "Are you going to tattoo that?" And I said, "Not now." And then he would redraw my drawing right on the spot for me. And he'd always say, "Do something like that." I said, No, I'm going to do exactly that and tell everybody I drew it. It was just flawless.
Yeah, but it was intimidating at the same time.
Oh, yeah, I was scared shitless to tattoo there.
So that was the start of all of the introduction to Canada, and we stayed there the first summer, and then in the winter, just after our first Christmas there, we went to Europe. My girlfriend and I, we did a tour around Europe. We spent a couple of weeks with an old friend of mine that was a tattooer from Scotland, Terry Wrigley.
Okay, yeah.
And his family, they were exceptionally good to us. We stayed with them for a couple of weeks, and I worked with him in his shop, and and then I went to a few different studios, not to work, but just to say hello. And just saying that I worked at the Smiling Buddha, opened a lot of doors. A lot of people automatically had respect for you. It was, you weren't the tattooer coming through. You work for Paul Jefferies. Oh, okay, so that was good. And then we did the first Amsterdam convention that Hanky Panky put on. We ended up there with Hardy and Paul, and there was a whole bunch of European. It was Philip Liu. I think that was the first time I met Philip Liu.
Okay, yeah.
Back then. So, and there was all the good European tattooers, Bernie Luther. That was So, it was good. It was just being around Paul and being part of his crew was really eye-opening, and it opened a lot of doors. So,
and your style today, like when I look at one of your tattoos, like I could read it from across the street. It's just like your work is so bold and clean, and it's just makes such a statement. Does that come from studying Japanese work? Is some of that Paul Jefferies?
A lot of it's Paul. There's been the two major influences in my tattoo career. Of course, the number one is Paul Jefferies. And I, until I leave this earth, I'll always be grateful to him for everything that he did for me. And the second one was Mike Roper from Arizona in the United States, who, and I was very much a Paul clone, and tried to be, and unabashedly, I didn't deny it. I loved Paul's work. I tried to do it. You'd always put your own little spin on things a bit, There was a couple of things that I thought I could make a little bit better, but, when I left Paul's eventually and come back to Australia, he said to me, you need to open up in the city and make a name for yourself.
Trevor McStay certainly made a name for himself, not only in Australia, but also on the world stage. Thanks for watching this episode. This was about 35 minutes of our 2-hour discussion. If you'd like to hear the rest of his profile, you'll have to wait for the Canadian Electric Tattoo Scene book when it comes out. Thanks for watching. Hope you're having a wonderful day.